Hi everyone, thanks for being with us, and I'm going to be looking at where's the cutting edge in market research right now in 2017. And I'm drawing on quite a lot of different inputs to do this. So obviously we've got all the preparation for the NewMR, and that's our little merry-go-round symbol there for the festival up on the top left. Last week, I had the honour of curating and co-chairing IIeX in Europe, and we had something like 80 presentations, 500 people, a massive exhibition of some of the new and exciting tools. I work with the GRIP report, and we've got another one of those coming out very shortly. And I'm lucky enough as well to work with ESOMAR on the more formal side of looking at the industry, seeing what's changing and what's happening. And if you're going to be at the ESOMAR APAC conference in Shanghai, you'll see a report there based very much on the global market research report and the ESOMAR global prices study. So pulling all of those strands together to try to get an overall picture of what's happening in the market research world. And let's start by talking about what is mainstream. And this is obviously a very mainstream in London, it's the Thames. Mobile is not cutting edge. Just about everybody is doing it. Sue and I are putting a chapter together for a book at the moment, and some research papers, and we're looking at the data globally. Over 30% of all surveys are being conducted by the mobile channel. That is mainstream. Communities are mainstream. I spend a lot of time talking to client-side organizations, and many of them have multiple online research communities. They have them with different providers. They have small ones, they have qualitative ones, they have large ones. This is really a mainstream operation. Going beyond direct questions, there is no dispute now. There are many, many things that you can't understand by simply asking somebody a direct question. Mike talked about this in his presentation on big data. If you want to look at behavior, look at the data, don't ask people to explain it. If you want to understand people's motivations, you can't ask them direct questions. We need to balance system 1 and system 2. So there is a real understanding that we've moved beyond direct questions. That's mainstream. Eye tracking. Nearly every client-side organization I talk to is using eye tracking some of the time. Most providers are not offering it, but that doesn't mean it's not mainstream. It's mainstream because most clients are buying it. We're seeing a real growth and a diversity in collaborative research where people take part in the exercise, they collect information themselves, they take photographs, they upload videos. That's mainstream. And of course, storytelling. Nobody can come along and say, we're cutting edge, we use storytelling. Now, storytelling is table stakes now. If you want to be in the game, you need to be using storytelling. So let's look at some of the things which are cutting edge. The first of those is automation. You are going to hear so much about automation in 2017 and probably next year as well. Not AI necessarily, but automation. So reports are becoming more and more automated. You go into a software tool and you click, okay, I want you to report that. I want you to produce a PowerPoint. I want you to produce a Word document. More and more products. So things like basis testing, Millward Brown's link test, and all of these have been products for many years, but the degree of automation inside those products has meant that they've become cheaper, they've become more consistent, more reliable products, and we're seeing a real growth of that. The whole of DIY is about automation. DIY means that you are talking to a machine, you're going to SurveyMonkey, you're going to a platform, you're downloading something, and you're not interacting with people, and that's because of the automation. And we're seeing more and more DIY because we're seeing more and more automation. And the final step in that process are companies like Validate It and Zapistore, who are selling shrink wrap solutions. So they're a little bit like DIY, but actually it's the whole thing. You don't design the questions, you don't get the ability to create an online discussion. It runs the whole thing and sends your result through. So we're going to see more and more automation. And if you're still going to be up in about 11 hours, you can join us on NewMR for a debate with some of the leading voices in market research, where we're going to look at the threats and the opportunities, because there are lots of opportunities, but there are also some threats involved in this route towards automation. The single biggest trend that I have seen in conferences recently, the market research conference on social media in London, IIeX in Amsterdam, the papers being put forward for this festival of NewMR have been around blending research. So combining social media and surveys. We had a presentation about 12 hours ago from Facebook, and they were combining surveys and social media. TNS are doing some really interesting thing with tracking studies, and they are combining really short surveys with social media to track brand imagery. So blending in that area. Um, we pretty much understand now that everything has to combine system one, which is the automated heuristics, and system two. And very, very few people would say, no, we can just go with system two, the rational brain. Very, very few people say we can just go with system one, the heuristics and the simple response systems that drive 95% of our actions. It's blending the two. If we look at big data, as Mike Sherman was doing just a few minutes ago, we're seeing people blending big data and survey data, big data and quantitative research, but also big data and qualitative data to make sure that we really do understand the whys and how should we change things, and why is it when I keep sending you the same dumb message you get offended. And qualitative is really opening up the doors there. And we're seeing interesting changes in the online communities. More and more of them are starting to do face-to-face, bringing in community members to meet the brand, bringing them in to do usability testing, bringing them in to do collaboration and crowdsourcing. So all the time we're seeing blended research. And one of the things that tells me is that we've moved away from new ideas and new technologies to better use of those ideas and technologies. I've dubbed this change really no change, lots of progress, because it's not requiring new technologies. It's not requiring new techniques. Nearly everything that is working and is exciting has been around for 5 years, some of them for 10 years, but they're being done much better now. We've just had a great presentation from Naveen and Hollis on messaging, but this is an enormous category. So we've got WeChat's logo up there in the middle. We had a question from Japan where Line is very big, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, Snapchat. All of these are really exciting. They're also a real challenge for us because they're what we call dark social. We can't use social media listening tools to listen to what's happening in Snapchat and WeChat and all of these sort of areas in the same sort of way. So we're having to collaborate. There was a great presentation I saw the other day from Engagement Labs in the UK, where they were having to use things like survey tools and passive devices on people's mobile phone because they needed to understand how WhatsApp and Snapchat were being used. But you can't listen in the same way as you can listen into most of social media with the listening tools. So the cutting edge stuff, as we've just seen from Naveen and Hollis there, is very much around using messaging. Agile. So Sarah Bowden was talking about Agile a few minutes ago. Some of the language here we all need to get used to. In old-fashioned market research terms, 5 years ago and more, the term Agile tended to mean we will write bespoke software for you. We're agile in the sense that we will listen to your needs and we will design something specifically for you. And that's not what Agile is meaning going forward. Agile now has a meaning which is much more from the software industry. So we need to be comfortable with this concept of the minimum viable product. So that overlapping area between the minimum and the viable is where the research needs to head towards. And you'll hear people talk about Waterfall. You'll hear about your clients talking about Waterfall, needing to move away from it. And Waterfall was, we designed something, then we tested it, then we refined it a bit based on the test, and we launched it. And it was a big bang launch, and it was a one straightforward process. And what you saw Sarah talking about, and what we see now a lot, are smaller steps. Design, test, refine, launch. Design, test, refine, launch. Repeating that very, very quickly. And the first launch is this minimum viable product. We're seeing that with research tools. We're seeing that with research methodologies. Our clients are increasingly adapting this. So if you have a client that is adapting an agile methodology, then you need to work towards this. Some of the new innovations around automation mean that we can facilitate this. Research has become quicker and cheaper, and it has to be quicker and cheaper if it's going to fit into this design, test, refine, launch loop, this iterative loop. It also doesn't need to be as good because we're going to get several bites at the cherry. It's more important that we get the results quickly, which often means by tomorrow, rather than a little bit more accurately but late. This is a phrase that I first heard Mardine Drew use, recognology, and I think it's a wonderful term, and it's where the cutting edge is. So we're seeing people use, like people like Living Lens in the UK, starting to have some great tools for searching video, creating transcripts automatically, looking for logos within text. We're seeing more and more people using image tools, searching through there to find this, because we want to be collaborative. We want people to upload videos. We want to go to Instagram and look at all that material that's there, but it's a lot of hard work, and the machine's beginning to help us. And you might wonder why I've put these photos in here. Well, I use Google Photos to store all of my images because it's got great bandwidth, but it also does something else. It tags them using AI. So when I type the word rock into Google Photos, it knows the things that are rock. If I type in smile, if I type in happy, it brings up my photos that show happy people or smiling people. If I type in Alps, it brings up pictures of the Alps. That is the way that this sort of automation is going. And we need to make sure that if we want to be on the cutting edge, we are using that, because it enables so many more tools to be brought into play at scale. So if we want to use images on social media, if we want people to be uploading video, we need to use these sort of technologies, and that's where the cutting edge is at the moment. We're seeing a lot more sophisticated analytics and predictive analytics, and the data scientists are really having their day in the sun at the moment, along with the big data people. But there are some very clear things that are going on within that. The first is working with multiple sources. How do I take data from very different sources with different granularity, different confidence, different structures, and bring that together so that I can do some great analysis? How do I work with data structures like JSON instead of my traditional relational databases to make sure I can do analysis? We're seeing a lot more longitudinal data where we're following the same people over time, and we want to do analysis with those. And a really key part of that is experimental design to make sure that we start to tease apart the difference between causality and correlation. As we move into this big data world, we move into sparse data. We do not all generate the same amount of sparse data. So we need data tools that enable us to hold that data, because it's much bigger if you have sparse data, and that can impute processes that deals with the inconsistencies. Moving beyond that, we have imperfect data. Now, we've always had imperfect data, but we're more aware of it now. And because we have multiple sources and we have longitudinal and we have sparse, we need tools that are much more resistant to dealing with imperfect data. And some of the things that Nate Silver is doing with his predictions, I think, are a really interesting way of assessing the quality of data and working with that data and bring it on through. And we're moving beyond just numerical data. So we're moving into the area of voice and emojis and images, and combining that with numerical data so that we get a much more complicated set of analytics. We are going to see some new tools coming out of academia which apply and are able to work in this sort of zone. So all of those things are cutting edge. Now, there are some things which are certainly new, but they're not cutting edge because actually they're not really here yet. And the first of those would be the Internet of Things. There are a tiny number of people who are making this work, but for the vast majority, there is not enough connectivity yet. There is not enough information yet. The processing tools are not there yet. We can't get a representative section. This will change soon. How soon, I'm not quite sure, but I was on Amazon.com the other day, and they were selling a package which you could buy, which had got Echo, so Alexa for your home, along with various tools to control the heating. It was all coming as one package, and of course that will move us towards Internet of Things. Brain scanners, fMRI scanners, EEG, all of these tools, they're around, people are using them, but they are slow and they're expensive. It takes too long. They tackle too narrow range of problems. However, implicit association testing is hot. I'm seeing so many clients now using implicit association testing, which is basically, it looks at how fast people respond to questions to be able to say, well, they think this is true, but they're not sure it's true. Or they don't really think this, but they're clicking it because of social desirability bias. Those are the sort of things that the implicit association is testing. So whilst the fMRI scanners and the other sorts of brain scanners are not really here yet, IAT is really hot. It's close to mainstream. Geolocation. We so thought this was going to be great 5 years ago, but it is still struggling. So in Naveen's presentation, he talked about beacons. Some use is being made of beacons, some use is being made of GPS location, but not much. There are too many logistical hurdles for it to be even considered cutting edge mainstream research. Immersive VR, virtual reality, that's where you put a headset on and you can't see the real world. Immersive augmented reality, you can still see the real world, but it's much more immersive. We're not just talking about Pokemon Go, but something more than that. It could come along really soon. We keep having this promise that we'll all have the next Google virtual reality headsets. We'll all have the next Samsung ones. It's certainly there for gamers. It's going to be there for virtual for usability testing, but it's not really around for most of us. It's not something we need to worry about this year. AI used as an interviewer. It's coming along. We're seeing some AI-based analysis, but we're not at the point where chatbots are going to replace moderators this year or next year. So it's, we keep a weather eye on it, but it's not what I would call cutting edge. So those are all in the not yet category. Next, I want to highlight things that are blind alleys. Anything that is more expensive, and it doesn't matter how good it is likely not to be mainstream. It's likely not to be cutting edge. It's really hard to come up with something that is more expensive than an existing tool. If you can tackle a problem that is not being tackled and that people know is a problem, then there is no more expensive, less expensive. There is simply the price of it, and that will be compared with the return on investment. But if you're competing with something else and you have a better solution, but it's more expensive, it's really hard for it to take off. Ethnography is, generally speaking, better than focus groups, but it's a tiny, tiny part of the industry because it takes longer and it's more expensive. We only use it when we have to use it. 3D interactive visualization for clients. They love them in the demonstrations. There are some fantastic systems. Most people do not have the time to go up the learning curve to make them really work for them. So whenever I see them brought out and clients sold into them, almost never do they really take off. I saw a fantastic system in the UK where you used immersive VR headsets to get inside longitudinal data, and you could see it, you could walk around this virtualization of it, and a handful of data experts are going to love that. But it's not going to be mainstream because clients have too many other jobs to do than to spend weeks learning how to use your tools. And anything where the users have to understand how the method works. The days of black boxes are gone. You can't sell something and say, don't worry about how it works. Trust me, this black box is great. The box has to be open and somebody has to test it and somebody has to understand it. But the people who are going to use this to turn research into insight, into actions, are not going to be the people that understand your methods. You might be using some really clever hierarchical bays to take sparse data from a Hadoop query set and turn it into recommendations. That's fine. Somebody needs to understand it, but it won't be the people using the system that will understand it. If your system requires people to understand it, it's likely to be a blind alley. So with that, I'd like to throw it open to questions and say hi to Sue.